Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Freeberg. I'm a program manager on Azure App Service. And today we have a couple folks from Red Hat joining us. We're going to be talking about building, deploying, and managing a security-focused hybrid environment with Red Hat and Microsoft. So today I'm joined by Don Pinto. He is a senior principal product marketing manager at Red Hat. And James Reed is also on the call. He is a principal solution architect, also for Red Hat. And like I said, my name is Jason Freeberg. I'm a program manager at Microsoft, and I work on Azure App Service. Here are our attendees again today. You can see we have James' Twitter handle and GitHub handle if you want to reach out. And if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is also right there. So this is an Ask the Expert session, so please send us whatever questions you have. You can expect to learn about some of the Red Hat and Azure partnership technologies that we have, and we'll go over how to submit your questions in just a second, right here actually. So you can use the Q&A box on your screen to submit questions. We have moderators on the call that will be checking over the questions, and once approved, the experts and I will field those questions and answer them here right on the call. So please remember that this session will be recorded, and to help out our moderators, don't spam the Q&A, and make sure you adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which I'll put up on the screen right here. So, like I alluded to, today you can ask us about RHEL and SQL on RHEL as well as Azure Red Hat Openshift, enterprise Kubernetes, containers, and all of that great stuff. And you can also ask us about all of the different options for deploying JBoss EAP onto Azure, and as well as Java in general on Azure App Service. So if you have any questions on those topics, feel free to put those in the chat. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off with a question over to James. James, there's a question here with Azure Red Hat Openshift. What does a customer manage, and what does Red Hat or Microsoft manage? What's the trade-off in the responsibilities for Arrow?
Sure thing. So can I just double check you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So great question. To start us off, happy to answer that. So Azure Red Hat Openshift is a fully managed service on Azure, obviously. So you can see Openshift within the Azure portal, and you can use the various Azure command line tools as well to manage the service and you have everything up and running, working within your Azure subscription. In terms of who manages what components, I like to give a simple answer, and then there's a more complex one as well. So the simple answer is, I say everything within the power in the data center, all the way up to the health of the cluster, is managed for you by Red Hat and Microsoft. So that means the virtual machine, the storage, networking. It means the installation of Linux on those virtual machines. It means that we're looking after the Kubernetes components, as well as all the CI/CD, as well as all the developer integration, and all that kind of stuff, making sure that's up and running. If you've used OpenShift before, you may be familiar with what's called cluster operators. So we can make sure that all those cluster operators, like there's an operator, for example, for networking, there's an operator, for example, for CI/CD, we make sure those operators are healthy and in a good state. So that's kind of a line, if you like, to think about what Red Hat Microsoft manage versus then what you manage. So it's everything above that line, if you like. Simply, that's kind of your applications, making sure your applications are up and running, making sure your applications are deployed. That's your responsibility as a customer or as a consumer of Azure Red Hat Openshift. Of course, you can raise support tickets and we'll kind of help you out and provide some guidance if you like, but Red Hat and Microsoft are looking after the health of the cluster, you're looking after the applications. So that's the simple answer. If you want more detail and see kind of like the legal definitions and that sort of stuff, you go to docs.microsoft.com/Azure/OpenShift or just search for ARO documentation, there's a really good responsibility matrix page that goes into extreme level of detail, exactly what we manage and exactly what you manage, all right? So it's kind of got customers' responsibility and then the Red Hat and Microsoft shared responsibility kind of legally defined in that page. Like I say, everything from powering the data center up to the health of the cluster, we look after for you. So it makes running Azure Red Hat OpenShift far easier for you when you're shipping it as a managed service. Hope that answers the question.
I was on mute there. So thank you. Yeah, that absolutely answers the question. So in your experience, James, why are customers using Arrow instead of a plain Kubernetes service like AKS?
Definitely. So this is obviously a really commonly asked question. So we speak to a lot of customers who are going on the Kubernetes journey, right? They want to modernize their applications, and the reason they want to modernize applications is getting value out to their customers quicker, delivering new application experiences, and really choosing Kubernetes and containers for doing that today. We speak to a lot of customers who have decided on containers, and a lot of customers who've decided on Kubernetes as that kind of container orchestration platform. A lot of customers who then start using Kubernetes find out, actually, this thing's got a pretty high learning curve, right? And then when you've spent some time learning Kubernetes, then you've got to realize, then you typically realize there's a lot of stuff you need to add to it to actually get applications working in production, right? I like to say that, if you're looking at getting a container running on your laptop, you can do that in an afternoon, right? If you get containers running on multiple servers using Kubernetes, yeah, that's again probably like a day or a couple of days worth of work or effort. But when you come to running containers in production, there's a whole bunch of concerns you have to think about, like monitoring, logging, integration with CI/CD, security auditing, who maintains those Linux operating systems, who maintains the base images. There's a whole host of challenges that customers come across, again, when they're looking towards those production environments, and not just running containers on your laptop or running containers at kind of at small scale. So what OpenShift provides is a turnkey application platform. Yes, it's built on Kubernetes, but it's providing all those it's providing solutions for all those day two concerns, like logging, like monitoring, and that's just some of the cool cluster features, right, that you kind of typically need to run Kubernetes in production. We then build on top of that and offer a lot of application services. So those operators that I mentioned earlier, those are pieces of code running in OpenShift that maintain parts of the OpenShift environment and allow to make it very easy to deploy databases or deploy typical ISV software on OpenShift as well. We'll also provide a bunch of developer services too. So that's integration into GitHub, into Visual Studio Code, integration into things like Azure DevOps, and we provide a whole bunch of tooling that makes it easy for developers to get up and running quickly, right? If you want to sit there and get a .NET application to container on OpenShift, that's really one command from Git repository through to building a container. We take care of all that for you. And lastly, then, it's come back to those cluster services. So I've mentioned logging and monitoring, as those are pretty typical things that we come up with from time to time. But as I say, it's all the other stuff on top of that. We've got built-in support for CI/CD. We've got OpenShift pipelines for customers who want to use it. We've got ability to do serverless and all that kind of stuff as well. So quite a long answer, but if I just summarize everything I've just said, customers use OpenShift because it's a turnkey application platform built on Kubernetes that allows customers to run containers in production far faster, far quicker than they could do if they built it themselves.
Awesome. Thank you, James. That was great. And I see one last question here. What can you tell me about the service level and the availability level of Arrow, and maybe how that ties into multi-region deployments?
Definitely. So again, this is a first-party native service on Azure, which means it comes with a financially backed SLA that's 99.95%. So again, everything, the power in the data center, all the way up to the health of the cluster, we've got a 99.95% SLA across all of that. Again, that SLA, I think, it encourages customers and gives them the confidence they've got a service they can use to run in production. Again, there's also support both from Red Hat and Microsoft. We provide integrated support on the solution. So you can raise tickets either with Red Hat or with Microsoft directly to get the support that you need to run the service. In terms of supporting multiple regions as well, so within a region, when we deploy Aero, we deploy across what's called 3 availability zones. So it's a fully highly available solution deployed by default. And again, that's going to be fine for single region deployments, but customers who want to do multi-region, we've got customers here in Europe who will deploy across 3 or 4 different regions, and then use some of the advanced tooling like Red Hat Advanced Cluster Manager to then manage an application environment across all of those clusters and have kind of a single view for everything. All right, so 99.95% SLA, fully backed by Microsoft and Red Hat support for running the service. And again, it's available in pretty much every single Azure region out there today.
Great, thanks, James. So now I think we have a couple more questions, and I'll hand it off for some questions. Looks like that we have for Dawn.
Hi, yeah, this is Jane Circle. I'm one of the moderators from Red Hat. See a question here. We were just talking a little bit about availability zones and multi-regions as Azure in general here. Dawn, just a basic question. How can customers get RHEL in the cloud? And can they, if they were already a Red Hat customer, do they get started right in Azure? Can they take their subscriptions with them? What do you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jane, for the question, and thanks everyone for joining. Really glad to be here talking on this Ignite session. So I'll start by saying, the options are very easy, and I want to lay out these options for the listeners here, right? So I would call them easy routes, right? So I'll start with the first route, which is just picking up the images of RHEL from the Azure Marketplace. So if you are familiar with Azure, you go to the Azure Marketplace, all you got to do is search for RHEL, pick your version of the operating system, and get started. So that's like, one of the options. If you're already a RHEL customer and you're already using RHEL on-premise, you can definitely move your subscription with you and take the subscription into the cloud. And for that, we have what we call as the Red Hat Cloud Access Program. So essentially, with this program, you can keep all your benefits, in terms of the and the terms of your subscription, but also run it in a certified cloud provider of your choice. In this case, Azure, right? So you have the luxury within the Cloud Access Program. You have the luxury of either uploading your own custom images using tools such as Image Builder, which are included in RHEL. Or you can also use pre-certified, ready-to-deploy gold images, which are also made available through this program. So essentially, as I said earlier, we really want to make it super easy, and by using any of these two options, you, the customer, get the flexibility to choose whatever works best for your environment.
Great, that's great information. Thanks, Don. This question is coming to you, Jason, kind of along the same lines as what the question was to Don, but this is for JBoss EAP on Azure. What kind of deployment options do customers have?
Great question, thank you. So as customers would probably expect, we have a couple of different options. First and foremost, there's virtual machines. So if customers have JBoss EAP running on-prem, then they can deploy to deployment templates on virtual machines that Azure and Red Hat jointly support and manage. And that'll be the closest to a pure lift and shift model from on-prem to the cloud. But of course, that comes with a little bit of a management overhead. It's not a PaaS service like Aero or App Service. So if customers want to take advantage of more of a platform service, they can move up to something like Azure Red Hat Openshift, and they can deploy their EAP apps there. And like what was mentioned earlier, there's an EAP operator that can run inside of Aero, and that will help run stateful applications in Aero in that cloud environment. So if you're running cluster deployments on-prem, you can use that EAP operator to run those same cluster deployments on Aero, which is great. And then Aero, though, will still expose some Kubernetes patterns and container technologies, of course. So if customers aren't familiar with those, they can use Azure App Service, which is also a managed platform. and now supports JBoss EAP, and that is jointly supported by Red Hat and Azure. And with Azure App Service, similar to Arrow, it's a managed platform where customers can deploy their EAP applications. And also, like was mentioned earlier, App Service has some built-in tools for monitoring, set up CI/CD, and similar developer tools like that as well. So virtual machines, Arrow, and App Service are the three primary landing zones for EAP.
Awesome. And also, I had the privilege of working on the EAP offers within Azure as part of the core team. And I just wanted to add that, just like Don was talking about, bring your own subscriptions with you for RHEL, you can also, customers can also do that with their EAP subscriptions. So if you are already a Red Hat customer using EAP, you can go ahead and deploy those directly on Azure. And we have gold images for EAP as well. So gives our customers lots of options. This one is, I think oh yeah, this one is definitely for you, Don. And this is one that I think has gotten a lot of publication, at least, which is around the CentOS End of Life. What should customers know about moving their CentOS workloads on Azure to RHEL? And do you have any tips or tricks about how they can accomplish this? And I should also say, like, what time period too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Jane, this is a common question that we've been getting, most recently, right? And so let me talk a little bit or remind everybody on the call here about the CentOS End of Life. So one of the most closer dates that you might want to bring on top, refresh everybody's memory with, is the CentOS Linux 8 End of Life, which is coming up on December 31st of this year. So that date is pretty close, and so we have, as Red Hat, come up with a couple of options that you can, to just ease your way forward. One option is by looking at things like the low cost, no cost, subscriptions that are available for RHEL. Now you may wonder, how do you basically go, for example, from CentOS Linux to RHEL if you do choose to go with the low cost, no cost subscriptions? And then, to make that happen, we do have a lot of tools that are available, such as Convert to RHEL, where you can take a CentOS Linux instance and then you run these tools. And with this tool, you can directly go from CentOS Linux to the same parity version with RHEL. So to RHEL. So I think that's sort of an easy way to move from CentOS Linux to RHEL. Now, we also do understand there's a huge community behind CentOS Linux. So I also want to, for those on the call who are developers who are contributing upstream to CentOS Linux, I wanted you to be aware about CentOS Stream. So CentOS Stream is as a part of, if you go to the CentOS website, you can definitely get access to some of the, to see some of the stream bits, as well as contribute to those stream bits by participating in CentOS 6. So that is the one way in which you can get involved with the community and definitely contribute into the stream, which later on will be, incarnations of the next version of RHEL.
Awesome.
James, back to you.
A lot of good information. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about time frames? Because isn't there CentOS 7 and CentOS 8 that's still being supported today?
Yes. So the CentOS for the CentOS, yes, both of them are heading towards end of the life. I just focused on CentOS 8, which is 2021. But then in a few years down the road, we have also the CentOS 8 end of life. So I can bring up the exact date of CentOS end of life, which is so CentOS 8 is basically, as I said, December 31st, and CentOS 7 end of the life is basically June 30th, 2024. So you still have some time for CentOS Linux 7 end of life, but for folks running CentOS Linux 8, it's coming up sooner.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks. I'm sure that'll help folks as they're looking at their migrations and what they need to do now versus 6 months or a year from now. Jason, this one is a question about Java. Could you talk a little bit or give us some advice on Java on Azure App Services? What are the options?
Yeah, sure thing. So Azure App Service has been around for about 8 years on Azure. And for those that aren't familiar, it's a managed platform for hosting web and API applications. So we have built-in support for popular programming languages like .NET, Node, Python, and also Java. And so we have support for running Java SE applications. So if you're using something like Spring Boot or anything that compiles to a jar application and runs maybe with an embedded servlet, you can deploy that right onto App Service. And we have options that run on Windows and Linux, so you can choose your flavor. And then we also have support for Tomcat. So if you're running something if you have an application that runs on a servlet like Jetty or Tomcat, we have a managed Tomcat solution as well. But if you are in neither of those camps and you still have a web or API application that you want to deploy to App Service, you can also just publish your own container. So there's always that option. If you have an application and your organization does use containers, you can also publish your own containers to App Service. And now the latest runtime that we support is JBoss on Azure App Service. So it kind of completes the whole spectrum of Java applications that we support on the platform, from Spring Boot and jar applications to Tomcat and embedded servlet applications like War apps, and then now to Jakarta EE applications running on JBoss on App Service, which is really exciting.
Great. Wow, that's a good choice for a lot of customers and a lot of developers. Don, this question is around RHEL. It's asking about SQL Server on RHEL, what considerations there should be if you're an Azure customer.
Yeah, absolutely, Jane. So let me talk a little bit on why you might want to run SQL Server on RHEL and even run it on Azure as well. So I wanted to just start this off by sharing a bit of a study that was recently done. So this is a Unisphere research study that surveyed over 300 members of PAS, and PAS is the Professional Association for SQL Server. It is a group of expert SQL Server users, DBAs, and data geeks, if you will. And the question that the survey asked was, why deploy SQL Server on Linux? I wanted to talk about the 3 top responses that we got of the survey. The 3 top responses were definitely reduced cost, enhanced performance, and less reliance on a single vendor. So definitely customers really love these 3 characteristics. And this is literally what attracts them to run something like SQL Server on Linux. But now why RHEL? And so I wanted to emphasize a little bit or dive deep a little bit into that performance aspect. So when it comes to running any database, performance is top of mind, right? So a database is the lifeblood of many different workloads for an enterprise. And so when you look about a lot of the characteristics for a database, performance really ranks at the top. For RHEL precisely, I wanted to share a little bit on the work that the teams, both Microsoft as well as Red Hat, have been working very hard on. So it's great to basically tell everybody that about the leading TPCH benchmark results for running SQL Server on RHEL. So these benchmark results show excellent price performance ratios when you do run SQL Server on RHEL. But also, in addition to price performance ratios, it also works well for different sizes of the database. So the TPCH benchmarks are run on different sizes of the database, from smaller database of a few gigabytes to large databases of from 10 to 100 of petabytes. So you can see that in these benchmarks, there is a huge spectrum of databases where SQL Server on RHEL really shines and does well. The other aspect when it comes to performance is things like tuning. Now, when it comes to a database, to tune a database, you take a database, run it on an operating system like RHEL, and then of course deploy it on a cloud instance. The sheer number of layers in that basically setup could make performance tuning really a nightmare. but not really, because when running it on RHEL, we have made performance tuning for the database running on RHEL really simple. And this is done in RHEL with TuneD profiles. So TuneD profiles are an easy way to basically tune a workload, for example, which is running on RHEL. And in this case, the teams have worked together to have a SQL Server TuneD profile for RHEL. What that essentially means for you as a customer is with a simple command, you can basically enable that particular TuneD profile and ensure that the best practices are implemented as a way to tune your database on the operating system. So it's as simple as that, just running a command. The third thing I wanted to talk about again from performance angle was some of the features that are explicitly created for Linux. So we all know SQL Server has been on Windows for many years, and the whole shift towards Linux has made this even more attractive. And so there are certain features I want to talk about. One of them particularly for SQL Server, which is basically called Enlightenment Mode. And what this essentially enables you to do is to use persistent memory system supports as a stable cache for database log files. So one of the most critical operation a database does is transaction logging. And as a part of the transaction logging, you have log files. And if you had times or that would cause a lot of disk I/O. But if you could write it with, let's say, a direct access into memory mapped persistent memory, that would be super fast. And that's exactly what Enlightenment Mode in SQL Server with persistent memory support in RHEL has made happen. So again, I would say scratch the surface in terms of like what performance benefits you can get out of running SQL on RHEL. And I know I didn't talk too much about the on the Azure aspect, but guess what? Whatever I kind of explained here also works on Azure. So the experience, what we want to give customers is you can Windows on Linux, but not only that, deploy this whole thing on Azure as well as and get all these improvements and enhancements that we kind of talked about the same, whether you're running on-premise or in the Azure environment.
Great, wonderful. We're almost at the top of the hour, but I had just a quick question over to James. This comes from a customer saying that they're just starting to test with containers. Would you recommend containerizing VMs, apps running on VMs? What's the overhead, and what do you recommend to migrate to native containers? Is that included in Arrow?
Yes, I think I understand the question. So, excuse me. So in Azure Red Hat OpenShift, you've got Kubernetes and you've got support for Linux containers. So if you're just starting off in the container journey and modernizing those applications into containers first of all, they will happily run on top of Azure Red Hat OpenShift. You can also run virtual machines on OpenShift generally. We don't support that in the Arrow service at the moment today, but if you do a self-managed OpenShift installation on Azure, you actually can run VMs there as well. But that's something what makes it such a compelling platform, right? With OpenShift, you've got one platform that consistently allows you to run virtual machines, allows you to run containers, that's mostly what it's used for, but also serverless functions as well, right? And that's giving customers the flexibility to say, hey, we want to have the same experience on-premise, maybe on Azure Stack, as we do on Azure, as well as any other public cloud there as well. So it's a really compelling platform. Like I say, it's a turnkey application platform built on Kubernetes. And yeah, absolutely. It's customers using it for a lot of different purposes. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you very much. And we are at the top of the hour, so I'd like to just give my thanks to James, Don, and Jason for their expertise today, and hope that our attendees got a lot out of it, and hope to see you at next year's Ignite.